Our final paper for this panel, which I'm looking forward to, is presented by Rupali Gupte, who is an architect, urbanist, and artist based in Mumbai. She is a professor at the School of Environment and Architecture, which she co-founded in 2013. Her paper today is entitled "Of Disintegrations, Immersions, Scattering, Shifting, and Flowing Towards a Pedagogy of Life." So let us all welcome Rupali Gupte. Thank you.
So thanks everyone for coming here. It's finally amazing to see all the people we saw as little icons on the screens for the last year in flesh and blood here. And so happy to see you. So this presentation is called "Of Disintegrations, Immersions, Scattering, Shifting and Flowing Towards a Pedagogy of Life." And the kind of larger argument that I'm making here is that the climate change narrative has been consistently shaped by a techno-legal language, which finds its origin in modern colonial practices. In recent years, this narrative finds itself insidiously embedded in funding structures and spatial policies that are directed towards an impending cataclysmic future, towards mitigation strategies that further exacerbate the situation, often ignoring more nuanced practices that have evolved over years. In the light of this paper asks, how can a close reading of spatial ecologies nuance the climate change narrative towards beyond broad-brush technocratic formulations? How can we learn from emergent knowledge structures that have been incrementally working out life forms through artistic practices that expand imaginations of life beyond colonial epistemologies? So that's the larger argument, and the paper is in 7 parts. I'll take you through each part slowly. The first one is called "Of Disintegrations, Termites." In an autonomous village a few hours from Mumbai, termites gnaw away at the foundations of a 100-year-old house. There's no pest control, no attempts made to arrest the process. Instead, the house is allowed to disintegrate in infinitesimal parts. The technique of this process involves leaving the foot of the chiseled rectangular column in the original state of the tree log. The rough-hewn parts of the tree stump peek out of the ground, sitting deftly below the rectangular column, which has gone through a rigorous process of cutting, planing, chiseling, polishing. In another part of the house, as if recording the memory of the tree from where this house obtained its materials, a slender tree trunk stands in the place where a column would have been. It has replaced an older column that had disintegrated. Forms of repair are integrated into the process of inhabitation. The building slowly disintegrates beyond repair and has to be completely rebuilt eventually. This process is tied up with rhythms of labor and festivals. Building becomes a social process in non-harvest times and agricultural societies. In recent times, when economies have become more complex, where tribal populations participate in circular migration, these rhythms are often severed. But the severance is more pronounced in the state response to these forms of inhabitation, where the government refuses to fund houses that are made in wattle and daub, which are dubbed in official parlance as kacha, or uncooked. The permanent nature of construction in brick and mortar that the funding necessitates lacks the logic of incrementality. The result is an awkward space that is often out of sync with the lives of its inhabitants. The cycle of building, repairing, disintegrating, only to renew and reconstruct from the debris has been the crux of space making in much of architectural production in South Asia. The 7th century Kashta Mandapa in Nepal is a rest house in the Hanuman Doka complex made with wood. So these are some of the images. And it is essentially an evolution of the party, a veranda in a public space where people spend their time outdoors. The entire structure is made with timber joinery designed in such a way as to allow individual members to be changed when they decay. The repair and maintenance were taken up by a community activity by self-organized committees called gutis, who would ensure the upkeep of the community infrastructure. There were no centralized consolidated architectural drawings to guide them. Methods of assembly, proportioning systems and ornaments and narratives were imbibed in people's body memories. Gupte's worked as human assemblages, eschewing the centralized figure of the modern architect. In 2015, the Kashta Mandapa was completely destroyed by the earthquake. Gupte committees fought to take charge of the reconstruction. Although ultimately they were not given charge after a protracted battle, they managed to deflect the counterintuitive reconstruction plan of strengthening the Kashta Mandapa with concrete and steel. As an earthquake-prone region, the joinery of the structure and others in the region are designed such that they are not only able to absorb minor shocks, but have the possibility of being completely reconstructed in the event of an earthquake. Common knowledge in the region is to reconstruct such that the joints only loosely fit, that they are not rigid and are allowed to sway. Colonial methods of construction brought in ideas of permanence and rigidity. Architecture needed to be robust, unable to disintegrate, to be flexible, or to be ephemeral. These were seen as weaknesses, to be overcome by ideas of permanence and durability, firmitas, which formed one of the arms of the Vitruvian triad, along with utility, utilitas, and beauty, venustas. This brings me to the second section. It's called Of Immersions, Vegetal Goddess. Footsteps made of rice paste make a map that traces routes that the vegetal goddess needs to take in the tribal house in Palghar near Mumbai to bless every corner of the house. The goddess is made from 17 different plants and herbs found in the surrounding forest. The vegetal goddess arrives on the 4th day from the advent of the elephant god Ganesh. While the bringing of the Ganesh idol is a recent Brahminical tradition co-opted by the tribals, worshipping the vegetal goddess is a much older tradition that now intersects with the tradition of bringing the Hindu goddess Gauri. In the mainstream Hindu religion, the goddess Gauri is dressed in a sari and ornaments made to sit on a chair in the house, taking anthropomorphic forms. However, in the tribal village, she's a green goddess made of creepers and flowers as fragments of the field and the forest. She's placed in the kitchen close to the cooking space where a rice heap and other accoutrements of the field and the forest are placed with her. Women stay up all night and sing songs to the goddess. The immersion that takes place, however, is a quiet, private affair. Women carry these vegetal goddesses by themselves to the field. Every field has a small demarcation for the placement of the goddess. It is a little red flower in the field. The number of flowers and placements are equal to the number of kitchens of the extended family. The goddess is made to sit in the field while praying for a bountiful crop. The goddess becomes one with the field and assures a good harvest the following year. Visarjan is a powerful concept both in western and eastern coasts of India, where gods, along with their majestic paraphernalia, are immersed and let go. There are several practices of creation and destruction, of care and sacrifice, and of building and dismantling in South Asia that have historically and in contemporary times shaped human ecologies. Here, totemic animal gods, mother goddesses, harvests, and animals that are enduring to people are created, cared for, and let go as a form of life. In this intense interaction with the environment, the practice of life happens. And that brings me to the third part of scattering, burning houses. In the state of Assam, in northeastern India, people get together for celebration the scene of Magh Bihu. Here, large structures made of wood or bamboo and thatch, known as meji, are built through an elaborate community effort. They're stacked with rice and other grains. These structures are guarded all night by villagers who live in temporary structures known as bela ghars, where they feast at night and in the morning as a gesture of thanksgiving towards the spirits for the bounty that season, light the meji in the midst of singing and dancing and feasting. Inspired by the meji burning was an artistic project called the Assembly of Desire, a gathering of artists in Guwahati organized by the Desire Machine Collective, Mrigang Madhukalia, and others around ideas of scattering, gathering, and blowing on the shifting island of Majuli. They claimed that the absence of reference of Assam or the northeast frontier in the narrative of Indian history was due to the region's autonomy, fluidity, and unstable geography influenced by various natural calamities and the changing course of the flow of the river Brahmaputra. They drew their concepts from the precarity of the region, both from state violence inflicted on it, as well as its indigenous worldview. The Assembly of Desire, inspired from the Meiji and the Bela Ghar, created an architectural space for an intimate gathering. Calling it an infrastructure of friendship, they created an extended occupation of time through performative presences in Majuli. After their occupation, they burnt the structure, sending it back to the fields as a way of invoking transmutative forces. In a recent essay reflecting on their observations after Documenta 15, Rux Media Collective argue for the role of contemporary art as placemaking. They argue that the social as a category is now amid us in a maligned, reified, and instrumentalized way. This is where they propose the role of art as placemaking, in which the social is a terrain of experiment and the creation of contingent arenas in which to engage and dispute. This placemaking needs, they argue, affordances where imagination, meaning-making, and a corporeal intimacy between gatherers creates new encounters. This placemaking, we further argue, also needs affordances from the specificities of cultures, of landscapes, matter, material geographies, actors, and agencies to create new egalitarian alchemies. The artists in Majuli were experimenting with these new forms of alchemical gatherings. The fourth part is called of shifting, moving houses. This is the story of a prefabricated house in Mulshiganj in Bangladesh that was moved to this new location by this family here from their land that was inundated. They took the help of carpenters who are in the practice of making such prefabricated houses that can move and can be bought in parts and assembled on all kinds of lands. The house is made from wood from Nigeria and tin infills. These are some of the spaces inside. These are non-standard houses. The door frames are thin and fitted with a decorative slug, only where the hinge has to be fitted. This makes the house light. The carpenters sell the houses in a market called the Ghorer Haat or the house market. These houses have also been documented by Marina Tabassum recently. So this tradition of tin wood houses has been around for more than 100 years. But the practice of making prefabricated houses on stilts has mushroomed locally in the last 30 years in different parts of Mulshiganj as a response to shifting conditions of climate change. Here, production of space has responded to climate crises, wetnesses, seepages, shifting land-water relationships, and property demarcations through an entire economic and cultural ecology involving a range of actors and agencies, as opposed to practices of resistances and hardening. This brings me to the fifth part, which is called of flowing memories, land, and floating inhabitations. Two other interesting stories, which I won't have the time to go through in detail, but these are about two works by two groups of artists. And one is the Khalgaon in Assam, recorded by the Anga Art Collective based in Assam. A village that was washed away, Khalgaon, is a village that was washed away by changing course of the Brahmaputra, but remains in the collective memory of its inhabitants. And the second is the shifting Indus Delta, where people whose villages have been washed away return to shrines left in the middle of water, documented by artists Shahana Rajni and John Pension Lassus. Stories of both deltas tell us how drifting landforms get congealed in memories and how forms of myths, legends, and stories become as real as corporeal living. Narrative cultures have evolved in South Asia as ways of knowing the world. Colonial knowledge structures saw these as superstitious and lesser forms of knowing. Boaventura Santos proposes a re-knowing through engaging in narratives. Storytelling, he says, generates a sense of immediate and concrete co-presence through which social experiences that exist in different times, spaces, and cultures become more easily accessible and intelligible, a type of co-presence that cannot be achieved by conceptual language, whether technical, philosophical, or scientific. And that just brings me to the last two categories. Okay. Sorry, I'm missing two title slides, which I had sent in the last presentation. This was the first one I've got. But okay, so there are two sections. One is called Future Trajectories. This is what some of these stories that I'm talking about sort of leads to. So what do the stories and practices of disintegration, immersion, scattering, shifting, and flowing have to tell us about future trajectories? Questions of permanence are inextricably tied to notions of property. It is robust property that can be monetized, mortgaged, inherited, sold, and taxed. Colonial practices ensured that there were no ambiguities in the way land and building were understood. They had to endure to become taxable. People would fish on the same land that they farmed on. Colonial structures found these practices problematic. They needed these to be clarified and made into dry land. Gypsies living on boats in Bangladesh were deemed illegal, whereas a floating existence was a form of life. The practices of shifting houses that have evolved in Bangladesh, as the Mulshiganj example shows, perhaps suggest future trajectories where permanence may not be the datum, but suggest new forms of existences that challenge ideas of property, permanence, and privacy that have become our givens in our modern existences. The multitudinous examples of repair and retrofit in South Asia suggest a form of life where an aesthetics of continuous repair and incrementality are built into practices of inhabitation. Anna Singh asks us to think with precarity. She asks us what our world-making would be if we thought with precarity as the condition of our times. For this, she tells us we need to tell a rush of stories, of polyphonic assemblages from human and non-human worlds. The stories in this paper point to forms of inhabitation built on such polyphonic temporalities. Similarly, Donna Haraway asks us to stay with the trouble. She tells us that in urgent times, many of us are tempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away the present and the past in order to make futures for coming generations. Staying with the trouble, however, requires learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing pivot between awful or Edenic pasts and apocalyptic or salvific futures, but as moral critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings. The cases we present in the paper deal with the complexities of extant human and non-human relationships, of materials, and of geographies. And this just brings me to the last part, which is called the pedagogy of life. And so for me as a pedagogue, the important question then is, if we really need to shift the very frameworks of world making, what should our pedagogic structures be like? How do we learn from forms of life that are not obsessed with the forward march of progress, of obsession, of property, permanence, and privacy? Santos asks us, in thinking through decolonizing methodologies, how is it possible to produce credible and reliable knowledges by means of methods that have little to do with the ones that modern science privileges? Some clues to rethink pedagogy through decolonial frameworks, we argue, may have to come from art as a form of life, breaking disciplinary boundaries that we have neatly assigned ourselves in a world of professionalism and extractivism. The Anga Art Collective, for instance, discussed earlier, this is an image from them, runs a platform for public pedagogy called the No School, which extends ways of knowing the world through situated knowledges. And although they're quite aware of the presentation that we had, the previous presentation of some of the right-wing appropriation of indigeneity, they claim to start looking at things afresh. And that's what art allows you to do. Artist and photographer Ashfika Rehman from Bangladesh brought a floating school to Chalan Beel, her grandmother's house, in 2021. The school was built on the urge to not rely on dryness to connect children to forms of knowledge, but instead dwell on wetness and ways of sensing the world through extant conditions. Children photographed their families, friends, animals, and their landscapes. They made large cyanotype prints washed in seawater and dried in the sun, where human and more than human lives entangled. They exhibited their photographs on saris stretched in the fields and on projections on a handmade boat. They moved away from known grammars of photography to grasp the world through their senses, only to let it float away. These art practices and pedagogy show us other ways of knowing the world, to decolonize our forms of knowledge and embed them in forms of life. At the School of Environment and Architecture in Mumbai, where I teach the school that is run by a small group of architects, we ask ourselves these questions. The stories in this paper and the circuitries of inhabitation and building represent what Abdul Malik Simon calls the majority in the global south. The forms of inhabitation in these stories, however, are very different from what is taught in general schools of architecture. Current design processes and policies are located in high modernistic processes that often facilitate a singular market logic, bound by linear processes comprising of client, brief, concept, design, working drawing, tender documents, contracting, building, and handover. This forms the bulk of pedagogy, publications, and other forms of validation. However, majority of the habitations, as the cases we've seen show, do not work through these processes. 95%, and these are figures that we have from India, 95% of habitation in India is not built by architects. So how does one, as an artist, architect, then enter the process of habitation creation is something we ask ourselves in the school. Pedagogical explorations at sea involve close narrative readings of the context along with its material conditions, process, and negotiations. For instance, a student, Stuti Shah, for her thesis looked closely at an urban village that was gentrifying due to rampant redevelopment initiatives, and instead she looked closely at negotiations in repair and retrofit initiated by some of the residents and proposed several possibilities of transactional spaces that improved social and economic opportunities for its communities. Similarly, Dhruv Sachla, who himself hailed from a site and services low-income neighborhood, looked closely at the practices of incrementality and repair and retrofit, and proposed a for small contractors for upgrading houses by mending some of the ways through which they looked at crafting of space. And the third one is Devar Seth, who looked at more than human inhabitations in cities and made a sensorial map of inhabitation of neighborhood docks. The drawing pointed to a fallacy of human habitation as shaped by ideas of property, notions of dirt, oculocentric logics, obsessions with vehicles, and a focus on horizontality. This drawing was then used to develop design strategies to rethink open spaces in the neighborhood. The new design worked without boundary walls, straight lines, horizontal surfaces, etc. here. His study was not only used to make habitable spaces for stray animals, instead it aimed at changing habitable spaces for humans through learning from animals. So in conclusion, this paper has argued that modern spatial logics, which bring in ideas of permanence, completeness, perfection, clarity, property, are not capable of handling the complexities of inhabitation. On the other hand, there are many habitation practices on the ground which are shaped by ideas of impermanence, incompleteness, imperfection, contradiction, incoherence, multiplicity, and incrementality. A practice and pedagogy that responds to this will require to be shape-shifting and agile. It will always be provisional. Thank you.